1K Dreamer please.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We're finally checking out TEO in Advent Expedition. The reason I put him last is because there's so much to talk about this boss, and in fact you're gonna learn something new most probably in this video itself. So for TEO himself, his build is actually very similar to his actual hero build, and that is he has immortality and he can also cast buff duration reduction, which is something we need to keep in mind. But before that, he also has Advent Expedition resistance, where he is able to reduce physical damage taken by 90% and reduces damage taken from double to quintuple target attacks by 90% as well, so you have to use single target magic attacks. And upon gaining immortality, he does give himself a crazy physical attack boost, so you definitely need to get rid of the immortality as soon as you can. And for the Corvus we are familiar with, he is able to reduce buff duration by 2 turns, 100% chance. It has a 40-second cooldown, so keep in mind on that. And for Talent Strike, 15 seconds, it just does piercing damage, so nothing much there. For the team here, we'll be using 2 single target magic DPS separately, and that is Pascal on one team and Yuri on one team. This is not the best team comp, I will explain why later on, and also there can be a lot of variation in terms of how you use skills, especially against TEO, because this is a boss where you need to buff and debuff. So as you can see here, I do buff here first. Okay, there's some cons to this, okay, because TEO actually does immediately reduce buff duration by 2 turns. He always uses this skill first, so you have to keep in mind, perhaps you may want to opt for an option where you use the buff later, after he has applied the buff duration reduction. So after you have buffed with Lina as well as Biscuit and applied magic vulnerability with Espada here, proceed to cast Pascal's skills and you can quickly nuke TEO down and achieve that 1 million score to move on from phase 1 as soon as you can. In this way, you'll be able to capitalize on having many turns in phase 2 and increasing your score further to a very good amount. Of course, you can also use Daisy's top skill here for magic attack increase to buff Pascal's damage output even more. But I would say the main buffing skills will still come from Lina as well as Biscuit, so you have to keep in mind how to use these buffs and when to use them, and we'll talk about this later in a very detailed turn count guide. So phase 1, to be honest, nothing much, just have to buff and use Pascal's skills. The reason why Pascal is used here is because of his very efficient nuking capabilities and his ability to recycle his skills very quickly. So over here, once TEO has gained his immortality, you are definitely going to need to apply the buff removal instantly from Biscuit to remove it. In this particular phase, the same thing should happen, whereby you are supposed to use buff removal, but because, you know, there's a very high chance that we aren't going to do that much damage anyway, and we aren't able to kill TEO all the way down to the next immortality phase, so you actually don't have to think about bringing a buff removal unit here, whereas you can focus on just having a lot of damage or trying to push your Yuri's damage to the maximum possible. If you feel that you are taking too much damage from TEO, of course having a healer here is going to be very good as well. For this particular case, we are running a more free-to-play version, and that is using Charon. Of course, Miho's skills here are very useful in terms of not just reducing buff duration reduction, which could work for TEO's immortality, but also applying magic vulnerability. So in case you do not have a T6 Vanessa like in this case, Miho being able to apply magic vulnerability from her bottom skill is going to be very helpful in letting you do more damage to TEO and just letting you get more scores in that sense. Coincidentally, we do end the entire 70 turns just right before he uses Corvus again, so technically it was pretty good that way. For Pascal, he's on the Avenger set so that he does more damage to bosses. This is his best set, and you should run crit damage main stats for the weapons if yours is T6, if not crit rate, crit damage. For Espada, also Avenger set because she is used in your Ox King, so definitely just keep the Avenger set on her. Biscuit here with block set. For Daisy here, she's on the crit set to do more damage to Ox King, but I just kept the set as it is. And then for Lina here, block set with HP percentage on the weapons. For Yuri here, you ideally want the Avenger set as well, so because she is the main DPS, so you can land more damage with that. For Charon here, he's on the block set. For Vanessa here, she is on the block set as well for just more tankiness and survivability. For Yonhee here, she's on the Avenger set to do more damage across bosses. And Miho here is on the crit set to allow her to do more damage potentially against the boss. But before we move on, I just want to show you guys the turn count, okay, and how the turns progress for this particular boss. So this is actually a turn count review that I've done for the run we saw earlier on. I'll give you guys a very brief explanation of how to read it. Basically, you read it from left to right. So the buff for Biscuit goes first, gives you 2 buffs. One is the weakness hit increase buff, and one is the boss damage increase buff. These buffs here, as you can see, are what Pascal has, because I don't really care about what the other units have. All you need to do is focus on what Pascal has. So if your Pascal has the highest speed, in turn 1 he'll take the first basic attack, immediately then reducing his buff count to 4 turns left. Thereafter, TEO went on, and Daisy, Espada, Lina, and Biscuit continued with their basic attacks all the way up to turn 6. So as you can see, every set of basic attacks comes in a set of 6 turns. And also you will use skills every 4 turns that have passed. So after Biscuit's skill has landed, and your Pascal has done a basic attack, resulting in the buff counts to be 4 turns left, TEO will actually then proceed to use Corvus and reduce the buff count again by 2 turns, so you're left with a 2-turn buff count on Pascal. And before your 5th basic attack happens, Lina actually uses a buff skill first, resulting in a 3-turn damage increase. As you can see, in turn 7, I noted a number 3 beside Pascal's name. That is the number of buffs he has at that point in time when he uses the basic attack. So he does have 3 buffs all intact when he uses the basic attack. But after he uses the basic attack, the turn counts will decrease by 1, so it will give you a 1-turn weakness hit increase, a 1-turn boss damage increase, and a 2-turn damage dealt increase. Moving forward, we did use Espada's skills to cast magic vulnerability before turn 9. And then for turn 11, because TEO's skills are both on cooldown, he will not use any skills here, so the basic attacks will just proceed. And finally on turn 13, right before turn 13 actually, your Pascal with all 3 buffs still intact will then be able to fire off his single target powerful attack. It starts a new cycle of basic attacks, so Pascal takes his basic attack here, as you can see, with 3 buffs intact and a +1 to denote the magic vulnerability debuff on TEO. So this is possibly his strongest basic attack in this entire cycle. And also, of course, since you have all 3 buffs and magic vulnerability applied, this nuke from Pascal will also be at its maximum potential. After Pascal takes his basic attack at turn 13, he will lose the weakness hit and boss damage increase buffs, leaving only the damage dealt buff with 1 turn. So as you can see, by turn 19, right before turn 19 happens, TEO will actually use his Corvus again. So TEO's Corvus comes every 16 turns, okay? And this will actually reduce Pascal's damage dealt to nothing. No buffs at this point. Pascal then takes another basic attack at turn 19. So this is the rough idea of how TEO's buff duration works and how you should be thinking of when to use your skills, because this is what makes this particular boss pretty challenging. In that sense, you just need to know when to time your skills properly and when to maximize damage output for you to be able to nuke phase 1 very fast. And then some of you may be thinking, what if we use Lina's skill closer to Pascal's skills? Because usually if you play other runs, you will tend to use Lina's skill right before Pascal's skill, because Lina's skill is a 3-turn buff, and due to time constraint and turn constraint, you want to keep it as close as Pascal's skills as possible. So this is the next comparison I did for Lina's buff to be pushed before turn 9 instead. So we basically swapped the order of the magic vulnerability application and Lina's buff. You will realize that it's the same outcome, because by turn 19, TEO will actually just reduce your buff durations to nothing, and your Pascal will just do that basic attack with no buffs at all on him. The only difference between these two situations is the turn 7 attack. At turn 7, for the initial situation where you have 3 buffs, in the next situation, if you do use Lina's buff later on, Pascal will only attack the enemy with 2 buffs with magic vulnerability applied. So the difference here comes in where which is more important. Is it damage boost or is it magic vulnerability? And this is something we need to keep in mind and something we need to further test. So some of you may then be wondering, why not just, use both buffs after TEO has landed the Corvus Eclipse? So you wouldn't be wasting your buffs just to the buff duration reduction. Yes, that is also a possible situation, and hence I've made this chart also. So basically you start off with the match by applying the magic vulnerability, and then you proceed to use Biscuit's buff and Lina's buff. Thereafter, you will just nuke with Pascal. You'll realize that in no matter what situation you do these skill orders, because of the way you can only use 3 skills in the early stage before the nuke, so the nuke will always happen before turn 13, and Pascal will always have his 3 buffs intact, and also having the magic vulnerability applied on TEO. Okay, so as you can see in this particular situation, the difference comes in where your first basic attack actually has no buffs compared to the one shown on the left, whereby the last basic attack has no buffs. Okay, so it's kind of the same thing, just that the last basic attack on the right situation, whereby we buff later, your Pascal will do a stronger basic attack due to the magic vulnerability being applied, because we didn't have that in the first turn for the one where we buffed early. So this is the difference between these two situations. So overall, I think I can conclude that you will do more damage if you buff Pascal later, after the buff duration reduction. Technically, this is something you should be doing. So the initial run through that you saw isn't the most perfect run. So keeping this idea alive of actually using the buffs after the Corvus Eclipse, what if we adjust the speed for Pascal instead? Because Pascal, as you can see in the initial situation on the left, he actually takes his first basic attack without any buffs, whereas in the next situation, if we do push his speed all the way to the bottom of the team, he will actually take his basic attack on turn 6, that is after you have applied Biscuit's buff. Okay, and instantly after that turn 6, he will reduce the turn count of the buffs by 1, followed by TEO's piercing attack, and then you will cast Lina's buff, giving him 3 buffs by turn 9. So by turn 12, he will actually be applying a 3+1 basic attack, and then it will reduce the turn count further. So as you can see, in comparison between these two situations, if Pascal's speed is actually lowest, you will only end up with 3 basic attacks by turn 19, whereas in the earlier situation when Pascal has the faster speed, you actually have 4 basic attacks by turn 19. The only difference between these two situations is that with a lower speed Pascal, you are able to do stronger basic attacks, even though you are doing lesser basic attacks. Does that make sense to you? So these are some considerations you might want to think about, whether using more basic attacks is better or using lesser but stronger basic attacks will be better. And in this next situation, what if you just straight up not use the magic vulnerability skill from Espada instead? Because you will realize by now that the issue is not about the buffs as well. Because you will realize by now that no matter how many times or how you actually adjust the buffs, Pascal will always only use 1 nuke within 19 turns. So the idea here is, could you possibly sneak in an additional nuke attack from Pascal so that he will do more damage in a shorter period of time? Now for that to happen, you will have to drop a skill entirely, and most likely we'll be dropping the magic vulnerability skill. But on that note, about not using as many skills and quickly using as many nukes as possible, we come to the best possible team that I have come across in all the guides that have been released, and that is to use Pascal, Rachel, Ariel, Biscuit, and Miho on team 1. The flow goes like this, whereby you cast Rachel's Phoenix to land the defense down on TEO, and then you'll proceed to buff with Biscuit, and then use all of Pascal's skills instantly from there. Now if you really want to sneak in a magic vulnerability from Miho, you can do that as well, because Biscuit's buff, if you apply it after Corvus, wouldn't disappear too quickly. But the idea behind this team is that you are buffing Pascal's damage capabilities passively, so that you don't have to waste time building up his skills or building up his damage in that sense, and you can just straight off do as much damage as possible, because having Rachel and Biscuit on the same team kind of buffs your Pascal's weakness hit to about 80% already, and because he has 100% guaranteed crit, all you need to do is really focus on giving him big crit damage in terms of stats, and you will be able to nuke phase 1 very quickly, especially with Miho there to boost weakness hit damage and Ariel there to boost magic damage overall. Team 2 on the other hand will be relying on Yuri's skills and also setting up accordingly with Vanessa, Lina and Espada, whereby Espada and Vanessa kind of are interchangeable, whereby both their skills are able to land magic vulnerability, especially for T6 Vanessa. If you don't have T6 Vanessa, then just stick to Espada's bottom skill. Then you will be buffing with Lina as well, and also buffing with Daisy with a top skill to increase magic attack for Yuri, and this is how you will proceed in terms of setting up for Team 2 to do as much damage as you can for Phase 2. There are also not much changes, in the sense that from what I've seen, the previous team was the most common team and the most used team. The only change that I've seen is basically swapping Daisy to the main damage dealer spot and swapping Yuri to the front line instead. So in this case, your skill priorities will change very slightly, in the sense that you will be using Daisy's skills over Yuri's skills as priority. That's all. And finally, the third variation is really again the same kind of team. You just want to put Daisy and Yuri together on the same back line, so that you have 2 damage dealers instead of just 1 single damage dealer. Again, I stress that for Team 1, this is possibly the best combination at the moment, because this can help to maximize Pascal's damage potential to the highest possible, and there's really no other substitute that you want for Team 1, because your goal is to really finish Phase 1 as quickly as possible so that you can score a lot more points in Phase 2. So for fast clear, Team 1 with Pascal is probably the way to go. So I hope this video taught you something new and also taught you how to look at turn counts, and if it did help, do give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more videos coming your way. Thank you so much and see you!